The National Organization for Victim Assistance, or NOVA, emerged in 1975 to champion dignity and compassion for victims of crime and crisis. Born out of a crime victims' rights movement, NOVA stands as the oldest national victim assistance organization of its kind in the world. NOVA is dedicated to innovative training skills for victim advocates and crisis responders who are trained to employ gracious agitation on behalf of victims and to provide direct services to those victims. Historically, the criminal prosecution of a case fell upon the victim. Those with the means to do so could pursue the justice process. To address the needs of those who couldn't prosecute a case, the state took on the burden of investigation and prosecution. When criminal prosecution became the state versus the accused, that had the unintended consequence of removing victims from the justice process, unless they were witnesses for the state's case. In the mid-1970s, most people recognized the inherent nature of victims' rights, even though our nation's laws, state and federal, did not include much support for victims. Where were victims in the judicial process? Nowhere official. So NOVA began and spearheaded a movement to affirm statutory rights for crime victims. When the United States Congress passed the Victims of Crime Act in 1984, that act declared what we all knew to be true. Victims of crime are the biggest stakeholders in the justice process. NOVA was heavily involved in the process of seeing the Victims of Crime Act become a reality and has continued to promote the rights, needs of, and services to victims of crime and crisis ever since. Today, in 33 of 50 state constitutions, victims' rights are affirmed in some form. Based upon our work with traumatized crime victims, NOVA created a protocol for providing trauma mitigation through our crisis response team training. This resulted in the deployment of the first NOVA crisis response team in 1986 to Edmond, Oklahoma, when a postal worker shot and killed 14 co-workers and then himself. Since that time, over 10,000 people have completed NOVA's crisis response team training. This has resulted in the formation of volunteer teams all over the United States and even in other parts of the world. These teams have a time-tested procedure for assisting people in a crisis. NOVA volunteers are prepared to work with victims individually or in groups, whether it is small-scale or mass casualty, a man-made or a natural disaster. In order to accomplish the expansion of our mission, NOVA must increase human resource capacity so that we can multiply awareness of the work we already do. Within the world of victim advocates, NOVA rocks. We are the go-to organization for all resources in the arena of victim assistance. Outside of this arena, we have very little name recognition. We need to expand our exposure throughout all the demographics. This will improve our ability to serve more victims. Even though NOVA has had a long and noble history, we revisited our mission in the mid-2000s to reflect on changing trends. Our mission really didn't change, but we did see that certain crimes, like identity theft, were not being addressed nationally for the serious impact they have on victims. We also renewed our commitment that all types of crimes can leave trauma in their wake, even as violent crime remains the most obvious. In NOVA's commitment to serve as the recognized leader in championing dignity and compassion for victims of crime and crisis, crucial is extending our capacity to expand our mission. Increasing our staff and membership will allow for greater capacity. Having developed and refined the tools for serving victims of all types of crimes and crises, we have a duty to take this expertise to a broader level. Coupled with the practice of sustainable sharing, NOVA's commitment to innovative excellence provides those we serve with compassionate competence. NOVA is a rare national organization that brings together the combination of victim advocacy and crisis response. NOVA provides expertise in training, consultation, and incident management to enhance the skills and capacities of those who serve victims of crime and crisis. While our administrative overhead is kept extremely low, less than 10% of NOVA's funding pays for administrative costs, NOVA also has an incredible network of exceptional professionals who serve as advocates, consultants, and trainers. Deep experience has provided this massive network of advocates that includes over 14,000 associates in North America and in other parts of the world. Within our movement, particularly the advocacy network, scores of professionals are near retirement. These people are key to leveraging our success. They're at the top of their game, require nominal compensation, and have the flexibility to take on projects that serve our network. Utilizing their invaluable knowledge and experience in the context of retirement allows high-quality mentoring, training, and services to be provided without a heavy fiscal demand. In the crisis response arena, the NOVA network is a vast matrix of thousands of volunteers. As an Army, these volunteers agree to serve without remuneration. As the Department of Homeland Security and Federal Emergency Management Agency both know, cost-effective mass casualty recovery relies heavily on volunteers who are trained to respond. NOVA volunteers meet and exceed these qualifications, providing the expert assistance necessary to start the process of rebuilding these damaged communities. NOVA's key to effectiveness is the ability to adapt quickly and efficiently to new trends. We know how to look forward through the hindsight of history. We remember the days before victims' rights and before victim services. A lot of ground has been gained in both of these areas. But despite all of these advances, many victims, particularly those experiencing financial crimes like identity theft, are still not afforded the most basic respect as victims. Still today, that knowledge of what victims suffer drives us in our relentless commitment to serve them. NOVA has the highest standards for professional competence coupled with the value of promoting human dignity and compassion. Competence has to be pursued as well as achieved. NOVA is a learning organization committed to continual improvement and adaptation to change. Competently serving the many as well as the one are key tactical values for NOVA. By assisting victims through our toll-free nationwide victim assistance line, NOVA is engaging victims individually and directly. This service provides insight into the real needs of victims. It also reveals victimization trends and enables NOVA to appropriately apply assistance protocols. NOVA also focuses on expanding our resources by multiplying training for responders and deepening their capacity to compassionately assist victims. NOVA practices sustainable sharing, which seeks to promote an abundance mentality along with healthy stewardship in allocating resources to serve victims of crime and crisis. Every dollar makes a real difference. The key metrics for NOVA are rooted in effective multiplication versus addition of our mission. Some of the simplest measurements of success revolve around quantifying the number of people trained. That's what I mean by addition. But more importantly, our success revolves around the number of people trained to train, which is what I mean by multiplication. NOVA is committed to multiplying resources. Multiplying resources comes from continual evaluation and a commitment to excellence. Dignity and compassion have a certain intangible nature to them. These qualities are exemplified in attitudes, but along with these attitudes, there has to be a competent action that demonstrates capability in order to render effective service to people. One of our significant metrics of success is the percentage of charitable giving used directly for our program services. NOVA's percentage historically averages above 90% annually. This is a very real display of our prudent stewardship of the funds with which we are entrusted. Even when the economic climate is in decline, donors can trust that we squeeze every program service dollar possible out of our budget. NOVA is invisible and yet is everywhere, whether officially or unofficially. We're embedded in many of the crime and crisis events across the nation. For example, NOVA's diverse network includes responses to hurricanes, earthquakes, campus shootings, bank robberies, and the terrorist attacks of 9/11, where we deployed over 700 responders immediately after the attacks and who continued to serve victims throughout the course of the next year. Yes, NOVA has been providing crisis intervention services nationally for over 25 years. However, because of our commitment to avoid any form of victim exploitation, we struggle to promote our services and the value they represent to communities, companies, and agencies without declaring openly who our clients have been. Although this makes us better at what we do, it makes branding and name recognition more difficult. In most cases, when a crisis happens in a community, leaders look to communities who have suffered similar tragedies. This is how they find out about NOVA. NOVA has been directly involved in every major national policy achievement in the crime victims' rights movement over the years. These would include the Victims of Crime Act, the Crime Victims' Rights Act, and the Violence Against Women Act. NOVA sent the first National Crisis Response Team in 1986, 20 years before the concept and needs would even be recognized. Although a bit dated, Worth magazine acknowledged NOVA as one of the best 100 charities in 2001. This particular award has been discontinued, but it is accurate to say that the same fiscal accountability that helped NOVA achieve this award is still applied to this day. Since 1975, NOVA's annual conference has been the longest-standing, most highly regarded victim assistance training of its type in the nation. NOVA is one of the very few, and maybe the only national organization in the country, that has chosen on principle not to accept federal grant funding for conferences. We do not want to adhere to the limitations that are placed upon grantees, nor the questionable deliverables that are commonly demanded. This might seem to many like NOVA is missing an important opportunity, but we feel instead that we are choosing to exercise stewardship that is in harmony with our mission. NOVA's Identity Theft Victim Assistance Summit, a one-day training, is also the only program of its type in the nation. It has proven very successful in equipping victim advocates and allied professionals with tools and strategies for managing identity theft victim assistance. Every year, we're called upon to serve the most desperate, traumatic needs of victims of crime and crisis that are affecting our country, and we do this without fanfare. NOVA is the go-to resource when tragedy strikes. This includes nearly every mass casualty incident that occurs around the nation, as well as workplace violence, school shootings, natural disasters, and critical incidents of all types. The very nature of our work has always been, and will likely always remain, the greatest challenge to NOVA. While crime is tragically common in so many ways, societal attitudes for the needs of victims can vary greatly. In the earliest days of the movement, it was the justice system itself that caused some of the deepest pain for victims. With the state versus the accused, at the core of the U.S. judicial process, victims only had a voice when they were used by the state as a witness to the crime against themselves or their loved ones, and this was rare. NOVA has worked diligently over the years to advance the needs of victims beyond just the utilitarian value that the system has placed upon them. Great strides have been made in advancing victims' rights and services. For instance, 33 of 50 states now affirm victims' rights in their constitutions. Yet this is not enough. Victims still recount callous and insensitive treatment from those in authority, even though they are the ones that have experienced the greatest loss and have been victimized the most. Another societal challenge remains. People can be reluctant to help crime victims because they feel criminals should be held accountable, and serving victims takes the burden off the perpetrators. There is a misconception that if they help to remediate a crime victim, then the criminal is relieved of his responsibility. Our society never wants to reward criminal behavior in this way. The criminal justice system provides some reparation through incarceration, but this is far from all that the victim needs. While no one wants to accept that really bad things can happen in all of our lives, they can and do. It requires acknowledging our worst fears to accept these realities and move toward supporting efforts to assist these victims. The unseemly nature of crime keeps many away from even discussing it, so as not to catch it. Another challenge that faces us is that NOVA is a unique national organization that is committed to affirming the needs of a wide range of crime and crisis victimizations. Our diversity is both our greatest strength and also our unmitigated weakness. While many victim assistance organizations today have NOVA DNA in them, that same multiplication of nonprofits has created a vast challenge for us. Currently, we are faced with the difficulty of distinguishing ourselves from the many specialized and noble efforts that dilute our brand. We believe our best kept secret is our success, and this is what distinguishes us from other organizations. Because of the discreet and sensitive nature of so many crises to which we respond, one of our most compassionate services is to protect the anonymity of the parties we are serving. It's difficult to promote the important work we do while preserving their privacy. Victims can easily be re-victimized by those who are trying to help. We're acutely aware of this concern and put it ahead of our own interests to promote our good work. Additional resources would be treated as investment capital. This would allow us to deepen our capacity for our current services, expand our offerings for new resources, and make training as accessible as possible to populations of professionals in fields that have limited funds for enrichment. NOVA's strong fiscal stewardship, exemplified in pristine annual audits, demonstrates that NOVA is a solid charitable investment. NOVA's refined mission, strategies, and tactical implementation are inculcated in the organizational culture. Additional resources would be treated just as prudently. NOVA's network is a cadre of skilled professionals who provide compassionate services, but who are often working on limited budgets. Additional funding would be used to catalyze low and no-cost training for this noble group of people. While many crisis response teams are organized and deployed at a local level, there are areas of the country that don't have teams accessible to them. It is possible that the scale of a crisis or the expertise required is beyond local resources. In any of these cases, team deployments need coordination through NOVA's national office. Increased capital means increased crisis responses. The expense of deploying a team of NOVA-trained volunteers costs about $1,000 per person for a week's deployment. While this is an exceptional value in light of the expert services rendered, it still has a financial reality. After examining the gaps in victim assistance, NOVA has a number of innovative initiatives that have yet to be fully utilized due to a lack of adequate funding. NOVA's network is comprised of skilled professionals who provide compassionate services, including NOVA's nationally recognized crisis response team training. However, many professionals cannot afford to participate in the trainings because of budget constraints. Increased funding would allow NOVA to offer more affordable options for interested professionals and increase the number of responders available following a crisis. There are crime and crisis victims in every business in America. Failing to recognize and provide assistance to these employees can substantially reduce the productivity of the companies. NOVA's Seal of Approval training is designed to orient companies with the basic tools for servicing employees, staff, and customers with victim-sensitive language and conduct. Identity theft is rapidly becoming a concern of all of us. Online data security breaches are a daily occurrence in most major industries. When NOVA began receiving calls from identity theft victims, we quickly became aware of how limited resources are for victims of this crime. The criminal justice system has few tools available to help them, so our advocates desperately needed training on how to do just that. NOVA's Identity Theft Victim Assistance Summits provide victim advocates and allied professionals with education and skills for combating and remediating the most prolific and fastest growing crime today, identity theft and identity fraud. Parallel to the Identity Theft Victim Assistance Summits for advocacy practitioners, NOVA has developed a sustainable consumer education component to orient the public on the risks associated with personal information. This would allow us to expand our reach from just training advocates to training consumers themselves on how they can better protect their online financial information. Better educated consumers will decrease victimization. With NOVA's network of crisis responders, deployments are currently limited because of scarce funding to address the associated expenses. All responders have agreed to provide their services as volunteers. But even with only nominal expenses associated with dispatching a team of 4 to an incident for just 1 week, if those requesting the service aren't able to subsidize that cost, it can impact NOVA's ability to respond to the request. With a network of over 10,000 trained professionals, NOVA's desire is to respond to each and every request without concern for the ability to fund expenses. All of NOVA's programs are impacting crime and crisis victims throughout the United States, but with your support, we could do so much more. Your donation would provide victim assistance to victims through increased service and training available in many areas. Please consider investing in NOVA. We hope to be helping your community soon.